Neville Goddard was a fervent believer in the power of imagination to bring dreams to life. People frequently draw inspiration from their surroundings, believing that this is true, yet vision comes first. Human beings are thus repeatedly recreating their history by focusing on tangible things. Human life itself is a creation of the human mind. From the mid-30s until he died in 1972, Neville Goddard preached from the perspective of God, insisting that the Bible is indeed a divine narrative, scripted to exchange information with the ordinary people and to communicate it in metaphors that are spoken from the heart. It was not a popular or commonly accepted view during that age. However, since his thoughts were revolutionary in so many dimensions, most people decided to adopt his maxims. Neville emphasized the lucidity and innovative thought process of other individuals of the contemporary era with his self-awareness in the domain of metaphysics. Neville Goddard, February 19, 1905 to October 1, 1972, also known as Neville, was a Barbadian novelist who published the Bible, mysticism, and self-help books. He was a prophet, famous teacher, and author who lived from 1905 until 1972. The Goddard clan was one of the most powerful and influential families in the West Indies. He moved to New York City around 1922 and began his career as a ballroom and ballet dancer. In 1931, he began studying Kabbalah under the guidance of an Ethiopian rabbi. He did not become a citizen of the United States until after World War II, when he served in the U.S. Army. In the early 1950s, Goddard gave a religious speech at the town hall. He was widely speculated to be planning a metaphysical telefilm presentation in 1954, yet it was uncertain if the concept ever materialized. Goddard had lived in Los Angeles for nearly 20 years when he died in West Hollywood in 1972. He is interred in Westbury Cemetery in St. Michael, Barbados. Neville Goddard was the most technically substantial and charismatic proponent of the New Thought philosophy of the 20th century. From the late 1930s until he died in 1972, he authored more than 10 volumes under the pen name Neville, and was a renowned speaker on metaphysical topics. Neville, a self-educated man with an unusually acute brain, preached a bold and comprehensive spiritual vision. He mentioned that everything people observe and experience, including other individuals, is the consequence of people's own thoughts and emotional responses. Everyone imagines an infinite number of situations and possibilities. When people realize this, they'll see that they become a slumbering branch of the Almighty, dressed in human shape at the helm of endless possibilities. From popular author Joseph Murphy to esoteric iconoclast Carlos Castaneda, Neville's thought processes impacted a broad array of spiritual philosophers and writers. He now has a sizable internet following due to the widespread availability of his digital lectures and books. Moreover, Neville's fame is expanding, as his mystical teachings are compatible with critical concerns in contemporary quantum physics discourse. However, little is revealed about this spiritual teacher who had an exceptional influence on the late 20th century American spiritual scenario. Neville exuded a kind of mysticism, which added to the curiosity and speculation surrounding his ideas, and where they originated. Conversely, the truth was far more moderate. Neville's childhood home in England was described as pleasant, yet impoverished. His brothers were constantly clamoring for clothes and fighting at the dinner table. At the age of 17, Neville moved to New York City to pursue theater, which resulted in an improved career as a vaudeville dancer and Broadway performer. With dance troupes, he traveled the length and breadth of America and England. However, Neville's existence in the theater was precarious. He augmented his money support by working as a lift operator and a shipping assistant. As he experienced an intriguing range of spiritual concepts, initially with self-styled mystical groups, and subsequently with the support of a life-changing mentor, The young performer's ambition at this stage began to wane. Neville recalled learning with a turbaned Ethiopian-born rabbi named Abdullah in his lectures. Their first meeting had a lucky feel to it, according to Neville. For 5 years, the two of them studied Hebrew, Scripture, and Kabbalah together, sowing the seeds of Neville's philosophical exposure. Neville became convinced that Scripture was replete with references to man's need to think from the beginning to the end. He dubbed it the I Am phase, a mystical interpretation of God's name. He reasoned that man could achieve any objective if he adopted its sensation in the present moment. Neville viewed each story in Scripture as a psychological metaphor of this fact. In an excerpt from his 1941 book, Your Faith is Your Fortune, he reimagined the narrative of Lot's wife, who transforms into a pillar of salt after returning her gaze to the city of Sodom. Neville made grandiose statements in public, such as how he used mental images to get an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army after being drafted during World War II. In reality, such a discharge did occur. On November 12, 1942, Neville enlisted in the Army, where he was required to serve for the length of the war. However, 4 months later, the scholar was separated from the services to undertake employment in the critical wartime industry. Neville's claim of training under a turbaned spiritual genius had a certain lineage in America's alternative spirituality. With her late 19th century descriptions of her connection to unseen great souls, Russian mystic H.P. Blavatsky sparked an idea in the minds of Western aspirants. Blavatsky reawakened hope that unseen assistance was available. That advice could be sought from a difficult-to-locate master of wisdom, someone who may emerge from an exotic region or another level of existence and disseminate enlightened knowledge. Neville, toward the end of his life, made his own assertions of mentorship under Abdullah. The Abdullah episode, as presented by Neville, could be dismissed as a tale taken and modified from Blavatsky. All of Neville's writings are powerful, and they show everyone what it means in the New Standard English edition of the Bible to be regenerated by the renewal of the mind. When people evaluate Neville, they learn the significance of the meaning of that verse in the sense that the mind can always be restored by a renewed use of the imagination, particularly in a sincerely creative way. In fact, Neville Goddard's entire volume of work exemplifies the true sense of that remark. One may consider a challenge that he is currently dealing with. Has he ever made any attempts to overcome it? Is he willing to think about changing his mind regarding the matter, if all efforts have kept failing? When issues and challenges arise, people often become fixated on the problem, attempting to come up with a solution. People live in three-dimensional reality, after all, and their issues are genuine. However, there is a permanent solution to assist human beings in resolving their issues. This ability is the capability of human imagination, which is a forerunner to uplift human civilization. Neville Goddard, about the mystic teacher. Neville Lancelot Goddard, 1905 to 1972, had been a prophet, a powerful instructor, and a prolific author. He did not identify himself simply as a metaphysician, or adhere to any of the isms or New Thought teachings promoted by the so-called communities. Goddard took the mantle to re-establish awareness that his predecessors intended to inform the world. He elaborated the physiological truths scripted in biblical teachings. On February 19, 1905, Neville Goddard was born to trader Joseph Nathaniel Goddard and Wilhelmina, née Hinkinson, in St. Michael, Barbados, in the British West Indies. He was the fourth of 10 boys and 1 girl in the household. At the age of 17, he made a voyage to the United States to enroll in dramatics. Eventually, he became a dancer, and it was during this time he married the first time, with which he had a son, Joseph Neville Goddard. After chatting with a Scotsman who lent him a large body of literature on physiology while traveling with his dancing group in England, he grew a keen interest in metaphysics. When he returned to New York, he left his job in the entertainment world to focus only on spiritual and mystical studies. Neville Goddard's first marriage shortly ended in divorce, and he remained unmarried for years until he met his second wife, a designer, in the 1930s. Victoria, or Vicky, was their daughter from the second marriage. He was recruited into the United States Army at the age of 38, which he despised because he believed he was too mature to be a soldier and had a family to look after. He was honorably discharged only after a few weeks of training, thanks to the magic of imagination, as Neville explained in his March 24, 1972 talk. He obtained full-fledged United States citizenship as a result of his brief Army training. Previously, he was a British citizen. Abdullah. After meeting Abdullah, an Ethiopian Jew who preached on esoteric Christianity and educated both Goddard and Joseph Murphy, Goddard's passion for esoteric biblical readings intensified. Neville first somewhat reluctantly went to hear him appease a friend's continuous pestering. Abdullah approached him as the meeting concluded and called him by his name and said that he was too late to come to him. Neville was taken aback and asked how he knew his name. Abdullah remained with him till Neville had received what he imparted on him. Following this introduction, Neville learned Hebrew, Kabbalah, and the secret symbolic values of Scripture alongside Abdullah. Speech. After touring extensively across the United States, Neville eventually settled in Los Angeles. He delivered a succession of television and radio addresses in the 1950s and spoke regularly to sold-out crowds at the Wilshire Ebell Theater for several years. He gave most speeches in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York in the 1960s and early 1970s. Neville's early talks and books focused primarily on what he called the law, or the process of visualizing one's physical existence. That's the part of his presentation that most closely approximates the New Thought movement's ideals. During his description of the law, Neville described how, during the Great Depression, he made a sea voyage from New York to meet his relatives in Barbados, empty-handed. Neville described how, through the application of mental imagery power, he was quietly dismissed from the military service to continue teaching throughout World War II. In the 1950s and 1960s, he presented listeners in San Francisco the real-time accounts of how others had used the law. He preached to spread the usage of imaginal force compassionately, on behalf of others, as man is going forward toward a future where everything is susceptible to his imaginal power. The Promise and the Law. In 1959, he started to encounter what he referred to as the promise. He was not aware of the promise until it began to unfold within him. It all started on the same day and continued for the next 3.5 years. This divine feeling had opened the door for him to biblical exposure. It's written in the book of Daniel. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Neville focused on the promise, then on the law. He claimed that one may employ imaginal power to transform one's situation, but would only be ephemeral. It would dissipate like smoke. One can use the law to make millions, to become famous, and so many worldly things. But the main goal is to follow Scripture. After subjugating the law to the promise, he was willing to know and share experiences from others who had followed the promise as he had been. Neville's theological understanding of the promise encompasses both the cosmology of after-death reunion with the Almighty and the future redemption of individuals who do not accept the promise throughout their lifetime. He often mentioned that God's promise is irrevocable, but God's law is conditional and takes its own sweet time. Neville assured that no one would be lost when he faced God. In response to a query concerning the fear of endless hell and damnation that many people were afraid of, he said that humans are privileged to use a law bestowed by God to face the adversities of life. The law can be expressed briefly that an imagining generates reality. In his dying moments, he declared that he was short of time. He was satisfied that he had accomplished the job he was assigned, and he would leave the world as a happy person. He was well aware that he would never return to this three-dimensional materialistic world because the promise in him had been fulfilled. On October 1, 1972, Neville Goddard left for a heavenly abode in Los Angeles at 67. His work had been archived on the web. Following are some notable books in the yearly Seratum penned by Neville Goddard. At Your Command, 1939. Your Faith is Your Fortune, 1941. Freedom for All, A Practical Application of the Bible, 1942. Feeling is the Secret, 1944. Prayer, The Art of Believing, 1945. The Search, 1946. 5 Lessons, A Master Class, 1948. Out of This World, Thinking Fourth Dimensionally, 1949. The Power of Awareness, 1952. Awakened Imagination, 1954. Seed Time and Harvest, A Mystical View of the Scriptures, 1956. I Know My Father, 1960. The Law and the Promise, 1961. He Breaks the Shell, 1964. Resurrection, 1966. For several years, Neville Goddard, or just Neville, was one of the most prolific, dramatic, and tremendously powerful instructors in the New Thought discipline. Neville explained the power of God and God's connection to every human being in a 1-hour talk that was simple yet eloquent. He spoke of God personally, as if he knew him very well, which he realized. Joseph Murphy, an eminent author and lecturer who was Neville's companion in New York City, once said that Neville might someday be acknowledged as one of the world's great mystics. Neville used to speak extempore and interspersed questions and answers into his lectures. He had no tapes to sell his preaching and subsequently earned money. In fact, some of the keen enthusiasts recorded his lectures and spread the doctrines worldwide that earned him a decent name and fame. Even though Neville's popularity peaked in the late 1950s and early 1960s, his message continues to resonate with spiritual readers around the contemporary world. Neville Goddard, a summary of his teachings. Neville Goddard longed to build a resource that included the fundamental spiritual themes that he used to thrive and strongly believed in divinity for the sake of simplicity. These are the underpinnings for how he conducted his life, which had improved significantly after implementing these teachings, as well as how he understood and viewed reality. These lessons will show all just how powerful they are. All of Neville's ideas are interconnected with one another. Nowadays, several coaches teach in a style that is mainly based on Neville Goddard's teachings, but there are also additional materials, learning, and experiences that preachers have accumulated over time. However, people are still learning inspired by Neville Goddard, and more importantly, they are gaining experience. One may expect to get inspired to acquire wisdom over time, since there is always more to learn and more truths to discover. Neville always had a positive hope and intention that his resource would explain the teachings in simple terms and provide context, especially for those just beginning their spiritual awakening. Awakening is awareness. Awareness is the state of being informed. Awareness and understanding of who they are lying at the heart of almost every spiritual instruction. People have no idea what reality is, yet they are aware that human values exist. Right now, everyone is aware of his own existence. People probably might have felt that they had a mind, a body, and lots of emotions. But no matter what, the one thing that remains constant is the consciousness of being self. Even if people lose their sense of self, they will still be able to say, I am. The foundation of God awareness, as well as Neville Goddard's teachings, is people's knowledge of becoming self-conscious. One should stay calm and realize that he is a part of God, as per Neville Goddard. Awareness is the sole reality. It's the one element that's everlasting and the only genuine thing. Since this is the viewing platform from which people view the universe, the human reality is whatever people are mindful of being self. Nothing is outside of human purview. In this way, human reality ignites within a human being, and everything else is a mere projection. Reality comes with imagination. There are no such things as coincidences. How many times has it happened to people that they had a vague feeling, visualized or imagined something that subsequently came true? Neville Goddard was a fervent believer in the power of imagination to bring dreams to life. People frequently take cues from their surroundings, assuming that this is true. Yet imagination comes beforehand. People are thus repeatedly recreating their history by focusing on the tangible. Life is a creation of the mind. It's as though somebody has a dream. Returning to consciousness is the only reality, and reality is nothing more than a reflection. People are the ones who are watching. They are essentially dreamers who are immersed in an endless dream that they refer to as life. They choose what they think to be real and how they go through the rituals. So what they see on the outside is up to their choice. Goddard explains to the masses to manage their imagination instead of letting it run on autopilot to trigger reality. Because people continually imagine something, being aware of what people allow them to become aware of, how they are generating their own reality, subsequently modifying it consciously. Oneness and consciousness. One of the most significant spiritual teachings is the concept of oneness. Every notion discussed revolves around it. In the human community, there is no such thing as true separation. There are no right and wrong, past and future, them and us. Only the entire cosmos exists in an eternal present. Separation is nothing more than an illusion established by the ego for Creator to have the chance to experience itself. Everything is inextricably connected in reality. All humans are part of the same consciousness, which is made up of individual manifestations. If individuals have ever experienced a mystical awakening, they've probably felt an overwhelming sense of oneness or unity with everything revolving around them. Enlightenment and oneness are the same entity, because enlightenment is simply an awareness of what people have always known, but are being reminded of frequently. If people haven't had this experience, they should have known that their thought process is the only thing keeping them aloof. Neville Goddard's teachings do not expressly mention oneness, but he states that consciousness is the sole reality. Humans are everything, and the entire world is a self-realization that is pushed forth, and that people are not separate from their desires. In essence, recognizing that all is one is similar to one's own awakening self. Only love is genuine. Love is more than an emotion or a sensation. It is self-enlightenment and the ultimate reality. God, origin, consciousness, eternity, and love are all terms that Neville used interchangeably. It's the same in the end. Everything that isn't love is a fantasy, because love is the only genuine emotion. Fear, for instance, is merely the absence of love, and hence isn't real. As a result, people have nothing to dread, because love is the inheritance and is constantly present in human life because it is self-recognition. Neville doesn't attempt to explain the concept of love, because that is beyond the scope of what can be taught. It does, however, strive to remove the barriers that prevent people from experiencing the power of love, which is natural human inheritance. Fear is the antithesis of love, because what is all-encompassing cannot have an opposition. Reality is mirror of subconscious. As within, so without. is the gist of Neville Goddard's teachings. What individuals feel and think to be true within is constantly reflected in their mindset. It occurs on a subconscious level the majority of the time. People cannot experience or sense anything that they do not think is true, since the physical element mirrors the subconscious thoughts. Attempting to change the external world without first resolving the internal issues is consequently futile. This is why, according to Neville Goddard's theories, man should not trust his senses more than his imagination, as imagination comes first. The entire world is nothing more than man's imagining thrust. It means that everything people come across in this world reflects self-beliefs, assumptions, worries, and anxieties. It includes the people and situations one comes across. The good news is that by changing human perception, anyone can change the world and produce miracles every day. After all, miracles are nothing more than a change in perception. Assumptions are backed by facts. The law of assumption asserts that anything people think to be true, whether factually correct or not, will always actually happen. Again, most human assumptions are instinctive and subconscious, based on human experiences or what other people think, which people subsequently accept as facts. It is, nevertheless, within human power to alter their assumptions, and thereby perceive a different reality. At times it can be impossible to attain, especially when the circumstances are the polar opposite of what one desires. On the other hand, Neville Goddard emphasizes the value of perseverance, sticking to human assumptions irrespective of what human senses predict. An assumption, even if erroneous, will harden into actuality if it is maintained. Then the subconscious mind devises methods to realize the assumption and make it a reality, in ways that can't be foretold or predicted, in such a natural and logical manner that it feels entirely natural and logical. Time leads to illusion. Time appears to be quite real from a human perspective. People grow old, have a past and a future, and live in a linear time frame. It has a limited and rare vibe about it. Is this, however, the case? The concept of time is challenged not only in spiritual teachings, but also in science, notably physics. Einstein developed the theory of relativity, which states that space and time are inextricably linked, implying that time is relative to the viewer rather than absolute. Time doesn't exist at all on the quantum level. In terms of experience, the past only exists in human memories, and the future does exist when people presume it. The only moment people ever have is the present moment. There is also a belief that the past is malleable, since people live in an everlasting present, and the past only occurs when one thinks about it. The revision technique, where one inwardly rewrites the tale of a past event to be how one would have intended it to change the state in one's own favor and rewrite the past, is well known in Neville Goddard's teachings. It makes no difference whether people believe this perception or not. What is essential is that the past does not have to hold one back, and the future is fully open to him. Every minute is a new opportunity to change the human state of mind and the vision of the world. Self-change is vital. Everything is built on the platform of self-consciousness or self-evaluation. The world represents not only human thoughts and assumptions, but also self-regulation as well. Essentially, the human notion of self is how people see and perceive themselves on a deep level, and how people walk through this environment. Everything, human beliefs, assumptions, ideas, feelings, and actions, is derived from the human self-concept. It's meaningless to try to alter people or situations before changing their perspective. One can't change the situation by exerting effort or applying external pressure, since all change begins within. As a result, the only person one can alter is self. People will experience the world around them differently if they change their idea and see themselves as the persons they want to be. People's ideas, emotions, and actions will change as well, affecting how they react and counter the situations. People could never have noticed the unlovable in others if they had a lofty, dignified self-concept. People must allow themselves to advance in consciousness to a higher level, and they will instantly switch others by changing self, rather than trying to change them via debate and force. There is no one to alter but self. Knowledge, consciousness, and the reality in which individuals exist are all influenced by the concept of self-esteem. One must turn to consciousness as the only true reality. Staying till the end. According to Neville Goddard, the best way to experience human wants is to go straight to the final result of people's wishes being fulfilled. Rather than micromanaging the how or attempting to analyze when it occurs, he instructs to picture what happens after the objective is fulfilled. It's crucial to think of the end not as something people want to achieve, or as something apart from them, but as something that has already occurred. If people keep thinking about goals but don't feel like they are coming true, they're living at the end of wishes not fulfilled, preventing them from becoming a reality. The goal behind thinking and living from the end of a desire fulfilled is to internalize the feeling of already having what people want, of realizing it's done, and that its actual manifestation is inescapable. If one enters this state, he will live, feel, act, and think differently, as someone who has everything he desires and is living in an area of plenty and contentment, rather than desire or craving. Secret feeling. Neville Goddard highlights the notion of feeling it real, which means that people must feel as if their wish has already manifested in their reality. The term feeling may not always imply emotion. Of course, the manifestation of the desire fulfilled will leave people delighted, relieved, and appreciative. But the emotion is unimportant. What people are experiencing negative feelings, they can make a lot of assumptions. The secret is feeling, since while Goddard teaches a multitude of procedures, such as the state analogous to sleep, mantras, revision, imaginal discussions, and others, the technique itself is unimportant. In fact, one strategy that works for one may not work as well for others, and vice versa. What is important is that it puts people in a condition of wishful thinking, where the fulfillment of human wants seems utterly real and natural, rather than something people are lacking or attempting to explain. Neville Goddard and his process to create reality. A man named Neville Goddard rose to fame in the metaphysical profession a long time ago, but not that long. His work was not as well known as Napoleon Hill's, but it was popular enough that audiences showed up wherever he talked. He referred to imagination as God, and kept insisting that the Bible was merely a tale. He intended to share this information with the common masses while covering these ideas in metaphors that related directly to the heart. According to multiple studies, it was not a popular or commonly accepted viewpoint. But his points were studied, and his thoughts were revolutionary to those who decided to recognize and accept them. All humans are God, as per Neville Goddard, and the most beautiful and powerful expression of godhood is imagination. All things are achievable with imagination. However, one must blur the lines between what he considers imaginary, a term that generally refers to things that aren't real, and what one considers genuine. People believe that being real is genuine, because both are the same. And if people dissolve those limits, they may make and become anything within their capability. One might go deeper and deeper down this endless rabbit hole, discovering concepts about the nature of narratives and fiction, and how they are only reflections of what is happening right now. To Neville, every story is true, and every scenario is coming vividly right now. One can find ideas for trying to act as if, and altering the role in this cosmic play. As people delve deeper, they'll discover that Neville's ideas hold well, and that people are always creating their reality, and that they are the creators of everything that surrounds them and enters their lives. It is a complex and divisive concept. While people have their reservations and fears about this concept, they believe it has a large degree of truth. After all, people create reality, and they have the option of accepting someone else's reality, along with the thoughts, actions, and ideas that come with it, or creating their own. As a result, they will inevitably shift the character they play, because all such definitions are false and subject to imagination's limitless mobility and instability. Imagination is a powerful tool for conjuring up anything. However, without the emotions that come with it, the reality remains mostly unaffected. Neville Goddard understood that people can imagine whatever they want, and there is a great merit in doing so. Still, there is nothing without the emotions that come from the fulfillment of human desire, because emotions are a language within the self. If people know how to learn God's language, there is nothing that can or will stifle them. Moreover, Neville made a point of stating and highlighting the distinction between envisioning of one's desires and imagining the fulfillment of those wishes. When people visualize the particular act of getting or acquiring what they want, they wind up erecting a series of barriers that drastically limit what they may do. It's not a negative idea, and it really does work, but Neville stressed the need to focus on the end result for the most accomplishments. The term end result can refer to a variety of things. It was an action for Neville that meant, without a doubt, the total realization of the wish he had in mind. It might be a fictitious event wherein someone praises people for realizing their ambition. This desire might be anything from buying a house, to going on a scheduled trip, to losing weight, to manufacturing a new car. This scenario represents the end result, and it signifies that people's desires have been fulfilled. Eventually, according to Neville, one must repeat the process and allow the seeds to grow. People will then be directed to the final phase of the methodology. It is regarding surrendering and letting go. It is the most difficult thing to accomplish, especially since people have most likely preferred the end result, and they know what is coming, and they are ready and eager, but also a bit afraid. It's not easy, but it's something they have discovered to be necessary. This may be the most important stage of all. Is imagination effective? It's a tricky question, since it may work for anyone or not work for others. And whether or not it works for people, it is a function of the human desire to accept and experiment with this functioning and how natural it feels. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. This strategy will not work for some people. It is simply not suited for them. And that's perfectly fine. Many approaches and practices haven't worked well for one. Some individuals will not benefit from this method. It is simply not right for them. But there's one thing Neville will propagate. If one decides to apply it, to accept this way of being and thinking for a specific time frame, he will notice that things do happen, and what really happens may surprise everyone. Neville Goddard believed strongly in the importance of imagination, in realizing one's objectives, leading a happy life, and believing in one's ultimate goals. Through talks and publications, he freely expressed his beliefs and values. While some praised him for it, he was critical of his faith in God and the Bible. With the success of books such as The Secret, readers have heard a lot about the law of attraction. Many emerging philosophers, particularly the late Wayne Dwyer, have been highly influenced by Neville Goddard's teachings. People have probably heard of Neville Goddard if they've explored manifestation strategies or employed the law of attraction to materialize whatever they want in life. In several ways, Neville Goddard had created an approach that blends visualization and the law of attraction. He did it nearly 50 years ago. His central premise is that people become divine through self-imagination, allowing them to conceive the truth they are looking for. While the law of attraction talks about harnessing the power of positive energy to attract what people want, visualization is the process of turning to the exact location and condition one aspires. Goddard's technique blends the two encouraging phenomena to visualize and feel what one aspires. Besides, Neville Goddard asserts that people can materialize things for their loved ones and initiate the process to understand the reality they nurture for others. Neville was a renowned speaker on metaphysical issues. For many years, Neville Goddard, also known as Neville, was one of the most dynamic and prominent teachers in creative techniques. He was noted for his skills to define the nature of God and his interaction with every human being through simple and straightforward hour-long lectures. Even though the Bible was a worldly concept, he imparted his thoughts on the value of self-respect, belief, and love. Neville Goddard once mentioned that if he were stranded in an isolated place with just one book to read, he would pick up the Bible without any reservation. Neville Goddard's early talks and writings dealt with the law of technology, which described making a physical reality out of what could be envisioned. The Law of Promise is perhaps the most well-known of Neville Goddard's publications, but there is a third part of his teaching that few people are aware of: revision. Many Christians who have a basic understanding of the Bible think that they represent God and that God resides in them. This belief may be purely philosophical. However, it's also true that they may not sense God's presence within themselves. Still, after Paul the Apostle's message in 1 Corinthians 3:16, which says, "You are the temple of God," the concept persists that God somehow is present in every human soul. Neville was aware of a power bigger than nuclear energy within him. He bonded with this power and leveraged it to achieve anything he desired in life. However, he did not practice any of the traditional religious procedures, nor did he adhere to any religious doctrine or preach any morality. He relied on the creative abilities of the imagination to accomplish everything one might think, and he put this concept into effect in his own and others' lives. The Feeling is the Secret by Neville is a miniature but the most profound book that can impact how people think and feel and how they can contribute to what they desire in life.